Marcus Thompson stood at his office window on the 15th floor of Sterling Industries, watching the early morning sun reflect off the surrounding skyscrapers. His fingers wrapped around his warm coffee mug, a simple gift from his team last Christmas with "World's Best Manager" written in fading letters. After 5 years at the company, this corner office had become his second home, filled with achievement certificates and graphs showing his department's growing success. At exactly 8:30 a.m., his morning routine was interrupted by an unexpected email from HR requesting his immediate presence in the conference room. Marcus straightened his navy blue tie, grabbed his tablet containing the latest performance reports, and walked confidently through the office. As he passed by, his team members smiled and waved, busy with the new cost-saving project he had introduced last month. The conference room felt unusually cold that morning. Richard Sterling Jr., the company's vice president, sat at the head of the long table, his expression hard and unwelcoming. Next to him sat Linda from HR, clutching a thin folder and avoiding eye contact. Marcus had seen this setup before, but never from this side of the table. "Take a seat, Thompson," Richard said, not bothering to stand or offer a handshake. His silver cufflinks caught the fluorescent light as he pushed a document across the polished table. "We're making some changes in the organization." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, but his face remained calm. Just yesterday, his department had reported a 23% increase in efficiency and significant cost savings. The numbers were clear. His leadership had brought tremendous value to Sterling Industries. "Sir, if this is about the quarterly review, I have the latest figures right here," Marcus said, reaching for his tablet. "Our team has exceeded all targets and—" "This isn't about numbers," Richard interrupted, his voice carrying a hint of irritation. "It's about cultural fit. Sterling Industries has certain traditions, certain ways of doing things. Your methods, while effective, don't align with our established culture." The real meaning behind those words hung heavy in the air. Marcus had heard similar phrases throughout his career, coded language that pointed to something that had nothing to do with his work and everything to do with his appearance. "With all due respect, Mr. Sterling," Marcus spoke carefully, "my team has consistently delivered results. We've reduced operational costs by 30% this year alone. The employee satisfaction scores in my department are the highest in the company's history." Linda shifted uncomfortably in her chair as Richard's face hardened. "Results aren't everything, Thompson. This decision is final. You'll receive 3 months' severance pay, and we expect you to clear out your office by the end of today." Marcus felt a mix of emotions surge through him: anger, disappointment, and surprisingly, pity for the short-sightedness before him. He thought about his team, about the projects they had planned, about the improvements they were making. But most of all, he thought about William Sterling Sr., Richard's father, and the conversations they had shared before the old man's passing. Standing up with dignity, Marcus straightened his suit jacket. "I understand. I'll have my things packed within the hour." His voice remained steady, professional, showing none of the turmoil beneath. As he walked back to his office, Marcus could feel the concerned eyes of his colleagues. News traveled fast in corporate corridors. He began packing his personal items into a cardboard box: the coffee mug, family photos, his degrees, and various awards. Each item told a story of success despite obstacles. What Richard Sterling Jr. couldn't know, was that this dismissal wasn't the end of Marcus Thompson's story at Sterling Industries. It was merely the beginning of a much larger plan, set in motion by someone who had seen Marcus's true value, William Sterling Sr. himself. As Marcus carried his box through the lobby, passing the large portrait of William Sterling Sr., a subtle smile crossed his face. The old man had always said that true character shows not in moments of success, but in moments of adversity. And Marcus Thompson had just proved his character in spades. Walking out into the bright morning sun, Marcus didn't look defeated. Instead, he walked with the confidence of someone who knew something others didn't. Sometimes, he thought, the best response to prejudice isn't anger or revenge. It's patience. And Marcus Thompson had learned patience very well indeed. 2 weeks after his dismissal from Sterling Industries, Marcus Thompson sat in the quiet library of his home office, holding an old leather-bound journal. The book had been given to him 3 years ago by William Sterling Sr., just months before the old man's death. Inside were handwritten notes, business strategies, and most importantly, the story of a friendship that nobody at Sterling Industries knew about. Marcus turned to his favorite page, where a photograph was carefully tucked between the pages. It showed him and William Sr. standing together at a small cafe, both smiling at the camera. That cafe had been their secret meeting place every Sunday morning for 2 years. Their unusual friendship had begun on a rainy Tuesday evening, when Marcus was working late at the office. He had found the company's founder, William Sterling Sr., struggling with the copy machine, muttering under his breath. Instead of just helping and leaving, Marcus had taken the time to show the older man how to use all the machine's features. William Sr. had been impressed not just by Marcus's kindness, but by his deep knowledge of the company's operations. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," William Sr. had said that evening, his eyes twinkling. "Always staying late, always trying to make things better." After that night, William Sr. began to take a special interest in Marcus's career. Their Sunday morning meetings became a ritual, hidden from the judgmental eyes of Richard Jr. and the other executives. Over coffee and bagels, the old man shared his business wisdom, while Marcus shared his fresh ideas for improving the company. Marcus walked over to his desk and opened a heavy safe hidden behind a painting. Inside lay thick folders of legal documents, proof of the shares William Sr. had secretly transferred to him over the years. The old man had been clever, using various holding companies and trusts to hide the transfers from his prejudiced son. "The company needs new blood, Marcus," William Sr. had told him during their last meeting. "Richard, he's my son, and I love him, but he's stuck in the past. He can't see talent because he's blinded by his own prejudices." Marcus remembered how tired William Sr. had looked that day, but his eyes had been sharp as ever. "I've watched you for years, son. You understand not just business, but people. That's rare." The sound of Marcus's phone ringing brought him back to the present. It was James Wilson, William Sr.'s longtime lawyer. "Marcus, the time has come," James said quietly. "The will reading is scheduled for next week. Are you ready?" Marcus looked at a recent newspaper article about Sterling Industries. Under Richard Jr.'s leadership, the company's stock had dropped 15%. Employee turnover was at an all-time high, and several major clients were threatening to leave. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice firm. "I'm ready." After ending the call, Marcus walked to his window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. He thought about his former team at Sterling Industries, about the cleaning staff who would share their homemade lunches with him, about the young interns he had mentored. They were the real heart of the company, not the expensive suits in the executive offices. William Sr. had understood this. During their Sunday meetings, he would often ask Marcus about the employees, their challenges, their ideas, their families. "A company is only as good as its people," he would say, "all its people." Marcus picked up the journal again, running his fingers over the worn leather cover. Inside, on the last page, William Sr. had written his final message. "Dear Marcus, when the time comes, remember, true leadership isn't about revenge. It's about vision. Show them a better way." Tomorrow, Marcus would meet with his financial advisors to prepare for the upcoming changes. But tonight, he would read through the old journal one more time, remembering the man who had seen past the color of his skin to recognize his true potential. As darkness fell outside his window, Marcus smiled, thinking about Richard Jr.'s face when the will would be read. But his smile wasn't about revenge. It was about the opportunity to fulfill William Sr.'s vision of what Sterling Industries could become. A company where talent and character mattered more than anything else. The chess piece that Richard Jr. had carelessly thrown away was actually a king in disguise. And soon, the whole board would change. The law office of Wilson and Associates occupied the entire 10th floor of a downtown building. On this crucial morning, Marcus Thompson arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a perfectly pressed black suit. The receptionist guided him to a large conference room where James Wilson, the family lawyer, was arranging papers on a polished oak table. "Good morning, Marcus," James said warmly. "Are you ready for this?" Before Marcus could answer, loud voices approached from the hallway. Richard Sterling Jr. entered the room, followed by 3 other Sterling Industries executives. Richard stopped abruptly when he saw Marcus, his face turning red with anger. "What is he doing here?" Richard demanded, pointing at Marcus. "This is a family matter." James Wilson adjusted his glasses calmly. Mr. Thompson is here at the specific request of your late father. Please, everyone take your seats. We have much to discuss. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Richard sat at the opposite end of the table from Marcus, whispering angrily with his colleagues. James Wilson opened a large envelope and pulled out William Sterling Sr.'s last will and testament. Before I begin, James said, I want to remind everyone that these are the final wishes of William Sterling Sr., and they are legally binding. The lawyer started reading through standard items, personal belongings, small monetary gifts to various charities, and properties. Richard looked increasingly bored and impatient. Then James reached a section that made him pause and take a deep breath. Regarding Sterling Industries, James read clearly, I, William Sterling Sr., hereby declare the following distribution of company shares to my son, Richard Sterling Jr. I maintain his current 35% ownership. To Marcus Thompson, I confirm the transfer of 30% of company shares, which has been executed gradually over the past 3 years through various holdings and trusts. The room exploded in chaos. Richard jumped to his feet, his face now purple with shock. This is impossible, he shouted. It must be a mistake. That man was just a regular employee. There's more, James continued firmly. Furthermore, Marcus Thompson is to be immediately instated as a member of the board of directors. Additionally, Richard Sterling Jr.'s position as vice president will be subject to a performance review by the board within 6 months. Marcus sat quietly, watching the scene unfold. He remembered William Sr.'s words about handling power with grace. The old man had predicted this exact reaction from his son. I'll fight this, Richard declared, pulling out his phone. I'll call our lawyers right now. James Wilson calmly pulled out another folder. I have here documented proof of all share transfers, properly filed and legally executed. I also have copies of your father's personal journals, describing his reasons for these decisions. Would you like me to read those as well? Richard slowly sank back into his chair, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. His father hadn't just given away shares. He had carefully planned this whole transition. Marcus finally spoke, his voice steady and calm. Mr. Sterling, your father believed in Sterling Industries' potential to be more than just profitable. He wanted it to be exemplary. That's what he and I discussed during our Sunday morning meetings for 2 years. Sunday meetings? Richard whispered, looking confused. Yes, Marcus continued. Your father mentored me, shared his vision with me, and ultimately trusted me to help carry it forward. He didn't do this to hurt you, but to help the company grow beyond old limitations. James Wilson pulled out one final envelope. Your father left this letter for you, Richard. He asked that you read it in private when this day came. Richard took the envelope with trembling hands. The fight seemed to drain out of him as he stared at his father's handwriting on the front. Marcus stood up, straightening his suit. I'll be at the office tomorrow morning. I suggest we schedule a board meeting for next week to discuss the company's future direction. He walked to the door, then turned back. And Richard, I hope we can work together to make your father proud. As Marcus left the law office, he felt the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about fulfilling a vision. William Sterling Sr. had trusted him with not just shares, but with his dream of what the company could become. In his car, Marcus looked at the old photograph of him and William Sr. one more time. I won't let you down, he whispered. The real work begins now. Marcus Thompson's return to Sterling Industries created waves of excitement throughout the building. As he walked through the main entrance at 8:00 a.m. sharp, wearing a charcoal gray suit and carrying his old briefcase, employees stopped to stare. Security guard Joe Martinez, who had always greeted Marcus warmly even on his last day, broke into a huge smile. Welcome back, Mr. Thompson, Joe said, handing him a new security badge. This one read board member under his name. The building hasn't been the same without you. Walking through the offices, Marcus noticed how much had changed in just a few weeks. The atmosphere felt tense, with people whispering in corners and quickly looking away when noticed. His old department, once full of energy and teamwork, now had empty desks and tired faces. Sarah Chen, his former assistant, rushed up to him with tears in her eyes. Mr. Thompson, is it true? Are you really back as an owner? Part owner, Marcus corrected gently. And yes, It's true. How have things been? Sarah's smile faded. Not good. Mr. Sterling Jr. has been difficult since you left. 3 people from our team quit last week. The new manager doesn't understand our systems, and the projects are falling behind. Marcus nodded, making mental notes. His first board meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock a.m., and he needed to be prepared. The boardroom looked exactly as he remembered it from his days giving presentations. But now, instead of standing nervously before the board, he took his seat at the large table. One by one, the other board members arrived. Many of them had barely noticed Marcus during his years as an employee. Today, they all shook his hand. Richard Sterling Jr. entered last, looking like he hadn't slept well. He sat at the head of the table out of habit, but everyone's eyes turned to Marcus. First, Marcus began, opening his laptop. I'd like to review the company's performance over the past month. He displayed a graph showing declining numbers. Our efficiency has dropped by 25%. Customer complaints have increased by 40%. 3 major clients are threatening to leave. Richard shifted uncomfortably. These are temporary setbacks. We're in a transition period. A transition you created by firing experienced managers without cause, said Barbara Wong, a longtime board member. Mr. Thompson's department was our most successful division. Now it's in chaos. Other board members began sharing their concerns. Years of frustration with Richard's leadership style came pouring out. His discriminatory hiring practices had cost them talented employees. His resistance to new ideas had made the company fall behind competitors. Enough, Richard shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I'm still the vice president of this company. Subject to board review, Marcus reminded him calmly. Your father put that condition in his will for a reason. Marcus stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Sterling Industries was built on innovation and respect for all employees. William Sterling Sr. understood that diversity makes us stronger. He knew that good ideas can come from anywhere, and everyone deserves a fair chance. He turned back to the board. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to help rebuild what made this company great. That means changes. He clicked to a new presentation showing his improvement plans, the same ones Richard had dismissed months ago. The board members leaned forward, interested. Even Richard found himself paying attention despite his anger. These plans could increase our efficiency by 35%, said Thomas Anderson, the senior board member. Why weren't we shown these before? Because they came from me, Marcus said simply. But now isn't the time to dwell on the past. We need to focus on the future. As the meeting continued, Marcus could see the shift happening. Board members who had once ignored him now asked for his opinion. They voted to implement his proposals immediately. Richard sat silently, watching his authority slip away with each vote. After the meeting, as people filed out, Marcus stopped Richard. Your office or mine? We need to talk. Richard looked surprised. You're taking my office? No, Marcus replied. I'm keeping my old one. Status symbols aren't what interest me. Fixing this company is what matters. As they walked together toward Richard's office, employees watched with curiosity. The man who had been unfairly fired was now walking side by side with the one who had fired him. But this wasn't about personal victory. It was about something much bigger. Marcus remembered William Sr.'s words. True power isn't about domination. It's about transformation. The real challenge was just beginning. 3 months had passed since Marcus Thompson's return to Sterling Industries. The office atmosphere had changed dramatically. The once quiet halls now buzzed with energy and purpose. On this particular morning, Marcus stood in the company cafeteria, watching employees from different departments sharing tables and ideas over coffee. Sarah Chen, now promoted to operations director, approached him with a tablet showing the latest numbers. Mr. Thompson, our quarterly results are in. Efficiency is up 40%, and employee satisfaction has reached an all-time high. Marcus smiled, remembering how different things had been just months ago. His first major change had been simple but powerful, removing the invisible barriers between departments. The executive dining room was converted into a community space where janitors could sit next to managers, and everyone's ideas were heard. How's the new mentorship program going? Marcus asked, watching a young intern explaining something excitedly to a senior manager at a nearby table. It's amazing, Sarah replied. We've paired 30 entry-level employees with senior staff. 3 of our maintenance staff members even enrolled in night school for business degrees. The company scholarship program you started is helping them pay for it. As they walked through the office, Marcus noticed the new suggestion boxes he'd installed were overflowing. Unlike before, when ideas were ignored, now each suggestion was reviewed weekly. Last month, a cleaning lady's idea about energy-efficient lighting had saved the company thousands of dollars. She'd received both recognition and a bonus. In the main conference room, a diverse group of employees was gathering for the monthly town hall meeting, another of Marcus's innovations. Richard Sterling Jr. sat among them, looking different from the angry man of 3 months ago. He was learning, slowly but surely. "Good morning, everyone," Marcus began, standing at the front. "Before we start, I'd like to recognize Maria Rodriguez from our cleaning staff. Her sustainability proposal has been approved by the board. Maria, would you like to present your ideas to the team?" A middle-aged woman in a cleaning uniform nervously approached the podium. 3 months ago, she wouldn't have been allowed in this room. Now, executives listened intently as she explained her plan for reducing waste and cutting costs. After her presentation, Richard surprised everyone by speaking up. "I've reviewed Maria's numbers. Implementing her ideas could save us nearly $200,000 annually. I'd like to nominate her to lead our new Environmental Impact Committee." Marcus watched with pride as Maria's face lit up with joy. This was what real change looked like, not just in policies, but in people's hearts and minds. Later that afternoon, Marcus met with the diversity hiring team he'd established. The room was filled with representatives from every department and level of the company. "We've received over 500 applications since announcing our new inclusive hiring policy," the HR director reported. "Our intern class for next year will be the most diverse in company history." "And the mentorship pairs?" Marcus asked. "Working better than expected. Even Mr. Sterling Jr. has taken 2 mentees under his wing." After the meeting, Marcus walked to his old corner office, the same one he'd been forced to leave months ago. He refused the larger executive office, preferring to stay close to his team. On his wall hung 2 pictures, one of William Sterling Sr. and one of the entire company staff taken last week, showing faces of every color and background, all wearing proud smiles. His phone buzzed with a message from Richard. "Can we meet? I want to discuss expanding the scholarship program." Marcus texted back a quick yes, remembering how far Richard had come. The man who had fired him for not fitting the company culture was now one of the strongest supporters of change. Looking out his window at the setting sun, Marcus thought about William Sterling Sr.'s vision. The old man had known that true transformation requires more than just changing leadership. It requires changing hearts and minds. By giving people opportunities rather than seeking revenge, Marcus had created something powerful, a company where everyone could succeed based on their abilities and ideas, not their appearance or background. On his desk lay a new suggestion from the maintenance team about improving the company's recycling system. Marcus picked it up, smiling. Tomorrow would bring more changes, more improvements, more opportunities to show that success comes in all colors, backgrounds, and positions. The company wasn't just transforming, it was becoming what it always should have been, a place where every person's potential could shine. Richard Sterling Jr. sat alone in his office, staring at the photograph of his father that had always hung on his wall. But today, he saw it differently. Next to it, he'd recently placed the letter his father had left him, the one he'd received at the will reading 3 months ago. He'd read it so many times that the paper was starting to wear at the edges. "My son," the letter began, "if you're reading this, it means you just learned about Marcus Thompson. Your anger is understandable, but ask yourself, why did I choose him? Watch him closely. Learn from him. He sees people the way I always wanted you to see them, not by their appearance, but by their character and abilities." A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. It was Janet, one of his new mentees from the mailroom. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have given her the time of day. Now, she was teaching him things about the company he'd never known. "Mr. Sterling," Janet said, "I had those reports you asked for about employee communication in different departments." Richard gestured for her to sit down. "Tell me what you found." As Janet explained her discoveries, Richard took notes. She'd uncovered communication problems he'd never noticed before, despite his years as VP. He remembered how he used to dismiss suggestions from lower-level employees, especially those who didn't look like him. One more thing, Janet added hesitantly. Some of the cleaning staff mentioned they're afraid to use the main entrance because of past experiences. They still use the back door out of habit. Richard felt a sharp pang of guilt, remembering how he once complained about certain people using the main lobby. "Make a note," he said. "We'll address this at tomorrow's staff meeting. Everyone uses the main entrance from now on. This is their company too." Later that day, Richard walked through the office, really seeing it for the first time. He noticed Mark from accounting helping Eva from maintenance with her college application, part of the new company scholarship program. In the break room, he saw managers and junior staff sharing lunch and ideas. The walls that had once divided people were coming down, and with them, his own mental barriers were crumbling. He stopped at Marcus's office, watching through the glass as his former enemy mentored a young intern. Richard remembered the day he fired Marcus, the prejudiced words he'd used, the arrogance in his voice. The shame of that memory still burned. "Come in," Marcus called, noticing him at the door. Richard entered, feeling the familiar mix of embarrassment and respect that now characterized their interactions. "I've been thinking about what my father wrote in his letter," he said, sitting down. "About seeing people differently." Marcus nodded, waiting patiently. "Yesterday," Richard continued, "Janet from the mailroom showed me problems in our communication system that I've missed for years. Problems I probably didn't want to see because I didn't think certain people's opinions mattered." "Growth starts with honesty," Marcus said quietly. "Your father knew that." Richard pulled out a folder. "I'd drawn up a proposal. I want to start a training program for executives, teaching them about unconscious bias, diversity, and inclusive leadership. And I want to be the first to take it." Marcus leaned forward, interested. "What inspired this?" "Last week, I overheard two young employees talking. One said they finally felt seen at work. The other said they felt safe sharing ideas." Richard's voice cracked slightly. "I realized I spent years making people feel the opposite way. I want to fix that." As they discussed the proposal, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The pure joy of doing the right thing, of growing as a person. His father had been right. Marcus wasn't just changing the company, he was changing hearts, including Richard's own. That evening, as Richard prepared to leave the office, he stopped by the maintenance break room, a place he'd never visited before. He sat down with the evening shift workers, listening to their stories, their ideas, their dreams for their children. Walking to his car later, he looked up at the building bearing his family's name. For the first time, he understood what his father had always tried to teach him. A true leader's legacy isn't measured in profits or power, but in the lives they touch and the barriers they break down. In his pocket, his father's letter crinkled, a reminder of how far he'd come and how far he still had to go. But for the first time in his life, Richard Sterling Jr. was walking the path his father had always hoped he would choose. The morning of the most important board meeting in Sterling Industries history began with unusual tension. Every chair in the large conference room was filled. Board members whispered among themselves, wondering what would happen. Today, after 6 months, they would vote on Richard Sterling Jr.'s future as vice president. Marcus Thompson arrived early, reviewing his notes one last time. The past 6 months had brought incredible changes to the company. Profits were up by 45%. Employee turnover had dropped to its lowest level in a decade. The company had won 3 awards for workplace diversity and innovation. Richard entered the room last, looking calm despite the pressure. He carried a thick folder and nodded respectfully to Marcus. The relationship between the two men had changed dramatically, but today would test how deep that change really went. "Before we begin the vote," Marcus said, standing up, "Mr. Sterling has asked to address the board." Richard walked to the front of the room, opened his folder, and took a deep breath. 6 months ago, I sat in this room as a different person. I was angry about losing control, afraid of change, and yes, I was prejudiced. The room fell completely silent. "I fired Marcus Thompson," Richard continued, his voice steady but humble, not because of his performance, which was excellent, but because of the color of his skin. "I was wrong. Deeply, terribly wrong." Several board members shifted uncomfortably, remembering how they had stayed silent during those times. "But my father," Richard's voice caught slightly, saw something I couldn't see. He saw that the future of this company needed more than just profits. It needed heart. It needed Marcus Thompson's vision of what we could become. Richard turned to face Marcus directly. The changes you brought to Sterling Industries aren't just about numbers. You've created a place where every person matters, where ideas can come from anywhere, where talent is recognized regardless of what someone looks like or where they come from. He then placed his folder on the table. Inside this folder is my resignation as vice president. Gasps filled the room. Marcus sat forward, surprised. But, Richard continued, there's also a proposal. I'm asking to stay with the company in a new role, as Director of Diversity and Inclusion Training. I want to help other executives learn what I've learned. I want to ensure that no one ever feels the way I made Marcus feel. Marcus stood up slowly. This wasn't what he had expected. He walked to the front of the room, standing beside Richard. Mr. Sterling, Marcus said, your father once told me that true leadership isn't about power. It's about growth. About admitting mistakes and learning from them. He picked up the folder and opened it, reading the proposal carefully. The board watched in silence as Marcus read. Finally, he looked up at Richard. This proposal is excellent, but I have a counter-offer. Marcus turned to address the board. I move that we create a new leadership structure. 2 equal partners, Richard and myself, working together as co-presidents. His knowledge of the company's history combined with my vision for its future. What do you say, Richard? Richard's eyes widened in surprise. After everything I did, you trust me as an equal partner. Marcus smiled. Your father trusted me when others wouldn't. Now it's my turn to trust you. You're not the same man who fired me 6 months ago. That man would never have written this proposal. Barbara Wong, the senior board member, stood up. I think we should vote on both positions together. All in favor of appointing Marcus Thompson and Richard Sterling Jr. as co-presidents of Sterling Industries? Every hand in the room went up. As the board members filed out after the meeting, Richard caught up with Marcus in the hallway. I don't know what to say, he admitted. Your father would be proud, Marcus replied. Not because of titles or positions, but because you've learned what he always tried to teach you, that character matters more than anything else. They walked together to the lobby, where employees were gathering for the announcement. Standing side by side, they saw not 2 separate groups divided by differences, but one united team ready to move forward together. Ready, partner? Marcus asked. Richard nodded, finally understanding what his father and Marcus had known all along, that the greatest transformations happen not through force or fear, but through forgiveness and faith in people's ability to change. Together, they stepped forward to address their employees, not as former enemies, but as partners in a new chapter of Sterling Industries' story. 1 year had passed since that historic board meeting that made Marcus Thompson and Richard Sterling Jr. co-presidents of Sterling Industries. On this bright morning, they both stood on the stage of the city's largest convention center, facing an audience of business leaders, journalists, and their entire company staff. Sterling Industries had just won the National Business Leadership Award for Most Progressive Workplace Transformation. The real victory wasn't in the shiny trophy, it was in the stories that had brought them here. Marcus looked out at the crowd, remembering his journey. In the front row sat Sarah Chen, now the company's youngest chief operating officer. Next to her was Maria Rodriguez, who had risen from the cleaning staff to become head of environmental innovation. Her waste reduction program had saved the company millions and was being copied by other businesses across the country. Richard stepped up to the microphone first. 1 year ago, I was a different person leading a different company. We thought success was just about profits. We were wrong. He paused, looking at his employees. Success is about people. All people. He gestured to the back of the room, where Janet from the mailroom, now a junior executive, was sitting with her graduating class from the company's education program. 15 employees who had started in entry-level positions were now completing their business degrees, fully paid for by Sterling Industries. Marcus took his turn at the microphone. When William Sterling Sr. gave me a chance years ago, he told me that real change happens one person at a time, one day at a time. Today, we're proving him right. The presentation screen behind them showed the numbers. Employee satisfaction up 85%. Profits increased by 60%. Staff turnover down by 70%, but more importantly, it showed photos. The new daycare center where employees' children played together, the learning centers where staff attended classes after work, the community projects where executives and janitors worked side by side. But our proudest achievement, Richard continued, isn't in these numbers. It's in the stories. He pointed to a young man in the audience. Kevin started as a parking attendant. Last month, he developed a new customer service system that's revolutionizing our business. Marcus added, and Amy, who used to be afraid to speak up in meetings because she was the only woman in her department, just led the biggest project in company history. Together, they unveiled Sterling Industries' new mission statement, Success Through Unity. Below it was a photo of William Sterling Sr., smiling proudly. After the ceremony, Marcus and Richard walked through the convention center where their employees were celebrating. They stopped at a wall displaying photos of the company's transformation over the past year. "Remember when you fired me?" Marcus asked, a slight smile on his face. Richard shook his head, embarrassed but honest. "Every day, it reminds me of how far we've come." He pointed to a photo of their first company-wide picnic, where people from all departments and backgrounds sat together, sharing food and stories. "This is what Dad always wanted." Later that evening, they hosted a special dinner not in an expensive restaurant, but in the company cafeteria. Executives sat with maintenance staff, sharing meals and dreams. The old barriers weren't just gone, they were forgotten. Marcus stood at the window of his office, looking at the city lights. On his desk sat 2 photographs, one of him and William Sterling Sr. at their old cafe, and a new one of him and Richard at the award ceremony, holding the trophy together. Sarah knocked on his door. "The new diversity training program has requests from 50 other companies," she reported. "They want to learn how we did it." "Tell them the truth," Marcus replied. "Tell them it starts with seeing people, really seeing them. The rest follows naturally." As the evening wound down, Marcus and Richard walked to the parking lot together. A group of young interns rushed past them, laughing and talking about their projects. They represented every background imaginable, but they moved as one team. "You know what, Marcus?" Richard said, watching them. "I finally understand what success really means." Marcus nodded, remembering William Sr.'s words. "True success isn't in breaking others down, but in lifting everyone up." The company's transformation had become a case study in business schools, but its real legacy was in the changed lives, the broken barriers, and the proof that when people are given a chance, they can rise above anyone's expectations. As they looked up at the building bearing the Sterling name, both men smiled. It wasn't just a company anymore. It was a beacon of what was possible when prejudice was replaced with possibility, and fear was transformed into faith in human potential.